Hi guys, welcome to Talk to Rachel. Você já imaginou ler um livro em inglês? Essa é uma pergunta que recebo bastante nas redes sociais. Como que eu posso começar a ler em inglês? E hoje eu vou mostrar para vocês uns livros que são escritos, são adaptados, vamos dizer, para pessoas que estão aprendendo inglês como segundo idioma. E nós vamos começar hoje a ler um livro junto. Quem está dentro do meu grupo de Telegram vai receber atividades e vocês vão conseguir praticar seu listening e seu reading juntos comigo. E a gente vai fazer através de um personagem super britânico, Sherlock Holmes. Let's go? Livros que chamam English Readers são livros que foram adaptados para pessoas que estão aprendendo inglês. E eles variam de o nível 1 até 7. 1 sendo mais fácil, 7 sendo mais difícil. Você consegue achar livros modernos, livros mais antigos. Então tem Agatha Christie, tem The Horse Whisperer, tem Frankenstein. E para você conseguir ler, eles vêm com glossário, vem com basicamente explicações de palavras, tem atividades no final e também a maioria vem com áudio para você escutar junto. Então são muito legais. Você consegue acessar esse tipo de livro em vários sites na internet, incluindo a Amazon, etc, tá bom? Só coloca lá English Readers para você conseguir encontrar esses livros, ok? Lembre de buscar através do site, do livro que é adequado para o seu nível, ok? 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. O livro que a gente vai estudar junto nos próximos 2 semanas é o livro de Sherlock Holmes, ok? Que é nível 3, que é no meio de tão básico quanto mais avançado. É para intermediário, vamos dizer. Eu escolhi esse nível porque eu acho que vai alcançar mais pessoas e vai deixar você com mais habilidade e mais facilidade de aproveitar o livro. E durante as próximas 2 semanas a gente vai estar lendo esse capítulo junto, ok? Cada dia um capítulo, um dia sim, um dia não, para você conseguir aproveitar dos exercícios também que eu estou colocando no Telegram. Então vamos começar o primeiro capítulo desse livro que chama The Return of Sherlock Holmes. Are you sitting comfortably? Antes de começar, vamos ver alguns personagens principais do livro. Obviamente, o principal é Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes é um detetive super famoso da literatura britânica, ok? Em 1891, o Holmes desapareceu. O autor que escreveu os livros basicamente a gente não sabe se ele morreu ou não. E depois, uns 4 anos depois, ele voltou no mundo da literatura e ele basicamente expliquei o livro chama The Return of Sherlock Holmes, que ele voltou. Todos os livros são narrados por Dr. Watson, que é o amigo de Sherlock Holmes, ajudante, ok? Tem bastante filme e série que mostra esse duplo de Sherlock Holmes e Dr. Watson em várias formas. Tem versão moderna, vem versão mais antigo, mas eles são muito famosos. E até tem um museu em Londres sobre Sherlock Holmes, ok? Então, durante essa história, você vai ver esses principais personagens, Sherlock Holmes e Dr. Watson, e um detetive que chama Mr. Lestrade. Ele trabalha por polícia, e a estação de polícia mais famoso na Inglaterra chama Scotland Yard. E esse é onde esses detetives trabalham. Então você vai ver ele trabalhando de uma forma diferente do Sherlock Holmes e Dr. Watson. E quem vai descobrir o que aconteceu com o crime? Vamos descobrir juntos durante nossas várias aulas de literatura. The Return of Sherlock Holmes by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Chapter 1, The Six Napoleons. Mr. Lestrade, a detective from Scotland Yard, often visited my friend Sherlock Holmes and me in the evening. Holmes enjoyed talking to Lestrade because he learned useful facts about Scotland Yard, London's most important police station. Lestrade liked these visits too, because Holmes was a good detective. Holmes always listened carefully if Lestrade had a difficult case. He often helped Lestrade. On one of these evening visits, Lestrade talked about the weather and other uninteresting things for a long time. Then he stopped talking and sat quietly. Holmes was interested in his silence. "Have you got a good case for me today?" he asked. "Oh, nothing important, Mr. Holmes," said the detective. Holmes laughed. "Please tell me about it," he said. "Well, Mr. Holmes, there is something, but it doesn't seem very important. I don't want to trouble you with it. I know you like difficult problems, but I think that this will perhaps interest Dr. Watson more than you." I was surprised when Lestrade said this. I like helping Sherlock Holmes with his detective work, but I am really a doctor, not a detective. So I said, "What's the matter? Is somebody ill?" "Yes, I think so. I think that somebody's very ill," was Lestrade's answer. "I think that he is completely mad. Someone is stealing cheap busts of Napoleon Bonaparte and breaking them. I think he hates Napoleon." 4 days later, he went into a shop in Kennington Road. The owner's name is Morse Hudson, and he sells pictures and other works of art. When the shop assistant was busy, the madman ran in. He picked up a bust of Napoleon and broke it into pieces and then ran away. Nobody saw his face. "Why are you so interested in this?" said Holmes. "Because he's done it again," replied Lestrade. "Yesterday he got into the house of a doctor, Dr. Barnicot. This doctor is very interested in Napoleon. He lives near Morse Hudson's shop, and he bought 2 busts there. He kept one bust at home and the other in his office 2 miles away. The thief took the bust from his home and broke it against the garden wall. Dr. Barnicot found it when he got up in the morning. He then went to his office at about 12 o'clock. To his surprise, the second bust was broken too. The pieces were all over the room." "This is more interesting," said Holmes. "Now please tell me, were these 3 busts exactly the same?" "Yes, they were." "Well," said Mr. Holmes, "why did the man choose these 3 busts? I'm sure that there are hundreds of other busts in London. I think the thief was only interested in the busts, not in Napoleon." "That's possible," Lestrade replied, "but can we be sure? There is no other shop that sells busts in that part of London. Perhaps the madman lives in the area and began with the nearest busts. What do you think, Dr. Watson? Can someone hate Napoleon so much?" "Yes, it's possible," I said, and I told them some interesting examples from the history of medicine. "But," I said, "how did this madman know where these 3 busts were?" "It's very interesting," said Sherlock Holmes. "Please tell us, Mr. Lestrade, if you learn more." Next morning I was dressing when Holmes came into my room. "Lestrade wants to see us immediately," he said. "He's at a house in Kensington." I quickly finished dressing. We had a cup of coffee, then we went to Kensington. The house was in a quiet street, but it was not far from the busy centre of London. That morning there was a large crowd of people standing outside. Lestrade was waiting for us. He looked very serious. I noticed that there was a lot of blood outside the front door of the house. Lestrade told us to come inside. There we met Horace Maharker, the man who lived there. He worked for a newspaper, and today he had a good story. but he could not write about it. He was too frightened. "Please tell us what you know, Mr. Harker," said Lestrade. "I was woken by a loud cry at about 3 o'clock this morning," he said. "I was very frightened, but I went downstairs. There was nobody in the room, but the window was open, and my bust of Napoleon was not there. So I opened the front door to call a policeman. I found a dead man lying there. He was covered in blood. I felt very sick." "Who is the dead man?" asked Holmes. "We don't know," Lestrade answered. "He had a cheap street map of London and a photograph of a very ugly man in his pockets. There was a small knife near him, but I don't know if he was killed with that knife." "What about the bust of Napoleon?" asked Holmes. "We found it quite near here in the garden of an empty house," said Lestrade. "It was broken, like the others." Lestrade took us to look at the broken bust. Mr. Harker stayed at home. He was beginning to feel better, and he wanted to write the story for his newspaper. We soon arrived at the empty house. The pieces of the bust were lying in the grass by the garden wall. Holmes picked up some pieces and looked at them carefully. "What do you think?" asked Lestrade. Holmes looked at him. "There's a lot more work for us to do," he said, "but there are some interesting questions here that we must think about. For example, why did a man kill someone for a cheap bust like this? And if he only wanted to break the bust, why didn't he break it at Mr. Harker's house? Why did he take it away with him? Maybe he carried it away because he didn't want Mr. Harker to hear him," said Lestrade. "Perhaps that's the reason," said Holmes. "But why did he bring it to this house and not another one?" "Because this house was empty," replied Lestrade. "But there's another empty house in this road, nearer to Mr. Harker's house. Why didn't he break it there?" "I really don't know," replied Lestrade. Holmes pointed to the streetlight above our heads. He could see what he was doing here. The garden of the other house was too dark. "That's true," said the detective. Then he asked, "But how does this help us, Mr. Holmes?" "I don't know yet," my friend answered, "but I'm going to think about it." "What are you going to do next, Mr. Lestrade?" "I want to find out who the dead man was. I need to know why he was in Kensington last night. Then I'll know who killed him outside Mr. Harker's house. Isn't that a good idea?" "Perhaps," replied Sherlock Holmes, "but it isn't my way." "So what are you going to do?" asked Lestrade. "I'll do things in my way, and you can do things in your way," said Sherlock Holmes. "Then we can talk about the case together later." Then he added something surprising. "If you see Mr. Harker, please tell him this. I'm sure that a dangerous Napoleon-hating madman was in his house last night." Lestrade was surprised. "Do you really think that's true?" Mr. Holmes laughed. "Not really," he said, "but I think the readers of Mr. Harker's newspaper will be interested. We must go now, but please visit us in our rooms in Baker Street at 6 o'clock this evening. Until then, can I keep the photograph that the dead man had with him? After you come to Baker Street, you must come out somewhere with me. Goodbye and good luck." Então esse foi o primeiro capítulo da nossa história de Sherlock Holmes. Eu espero que você gostou. Para você acompanhar melhor, corre lá no grupo de Telegram, onde vai ter a transcrição desse capítulo. Basicamente, eu quebrei o livro em várias partes para a gente conseguir, tem partes gerenciáveis para você conseguir acompanhar com mais facilidade durante as suas vidas corridas. Vai ter um capítulo um dia sim, um dia não. No dia que não tem a gravação, não tem a vídeo e a capítulo, você vai ter um quiz lá no meu grupo de Telegram também, revisando o que aconteceu naquele capítulo, ok? Então vai acontecer vários dias de leitura junto comigo. Eu quero que vocês comentem no vídeo, deixem seu comentário, indica para outras pessoas, para a gente ampliar esse reading group junto, ok? Porque eu acho o vocabulário que você tira de reading super importante, além do fato que você vai estar treinando seu listening, você vai estar treinando também, aprendendo tanta coisa nova, com certeza. Qualquer pergunta que você tem também sobre o que está acontecendo no livro ou vocabulário, pode deixar o seu comentário aqui embaixo do vídeo. Não esquece de inscrever no canal do YouTube para você acompanhar a resto de todos os capítulos que nós vamos estar estudando junto durante essas 2 semanas. I'll see you for chapter 2.